This is the Kyle Malnati Show. Our podcast provides an opportunity to expand your knowledge, and it's our goal to make real estate investing more approachable to everyone. Each episode, we tap into the mindset of real estate experts and share their stories. Live from the District of Columbia, you are watching the Kyle Malnati Show on YouTube. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and I am pleased to have back with me my man, Bo Menkiti. Bo, thanks for being on the show again.
Pleasure, Kyle.
Bo and I met in July during an NAR, that's National Association of Realtors Convention, because we're both part of this prestigious award called 30 Under 30. And the fun part about this is we get together every now and again, and we're here in DC, in the District of Columbia, to have a realtor event in front of a live audience. So it's a lot of fun. And we're excited to unpack the story here. So Bo has been a real estate investor and a realtor for a decade. And Bo has learned, I think, as we've talked about it, Bo's learned that not only real estate can be a wonderful way to derive some personal income, but to save that income and invest in real estate and really create some true assets. So Bo, a question that I have, because I have a lot of clients that are realtors, do you believe that every realtor should invest in rental property?
Well, I think it's a question of whether it's a question of whether or not every realtor wants to build wealth. So not everybody needs to build wealth, but if you want to build wealth, I think, and you're in the real estate business, investing in rental property is sort of a no-brainer. You think about the crisis we went through in Wall Street during this last sort of recession. We all the talk about insider trading and sort of folks having too much information and shorting companies. Well, we go to work every day and in an industry where it's not only perfectly legal but encouraged to have insider information. And our ability to use that information to do something positive in the neighborhoods that we're in the communities that we're in, while also building wealth over time is a tremendous opportunity. The sales business, I think, is one of the greatest businesses where, with very little financial investment, time, energy, pluck, and heart, you can make a phenomenal living. But it is a horrible asset. It's something that depends on your effort, and you see folks building teams, leveraging themselves. You see awesome systems they're putting in place to try to bring that. But even in the most systematized real estate business, it's a questionably hard asset. And so for us as real estate agents to take advantage of this opportunity we have to make a wonderful income and use that income to both derive an asset-based passive cash flow and also have an impact in the communities we're in is just a tremendous opportunity that I think we'd be silly not to take advantage of.
Yeah, and it's interesting, there's a lot of fear around real estate investing because real estate's an illiquid asset. What I mean by illiquid, it's not like stock where there's an exchange where you can go and sell it in a second once the market's open. Typical escrow for an apartment building is 45 to 60 days, and could be longer if you're selling a piece of land. And there's periods in the market where there's not a lot of capital, there's a lot of fear, and the market just kind of locks up. And so I think that the advantage as a real estate agent of being able to study the market and understand your comps and really find good deals for yourself, I think is a wonderful opportunity. So if you're educated and you do your due diligence and you do your analytics, and that was something you talked about in our podcast last July, just about the amount of demographic research you do and looking at emerging trends and finding neighborhoods that are up and coming and areas where you can shine a light on an asset that once was great, I think is really important for folks. So on one of our conference calls that I host for our 30 Under 30 group, Bo unpacked this concept, and it's so amazing and yet so simple. And we talked about in my presentation just a moment ago having a simple plan. And Bo's simple plan was to set himself a base salary as a realtor, and all the excess was going to be invested. So can you unpack that and kind of that earth-shattering concept of living on less than you make? It's kind of weird, but it's like God and Grandma's advice, right?
Yeah, it's about the simplest thing actually in the entire world, but not the easiest. It was probably the hardest thing for me in sort of my investing journey. So when I started in real estate, I had worked in the corporate world and had done fairly well. And then I had gone and worked in the nonprofit world, in an organization that was really passionate about the impact it was making in the world. And so I had my salary cut way down. But I knew that I could live off of this salary that I'd been living off of when I was working in the nonprofit world. So when we started the business, we set a salary at that amount. Basically said, I'm going to live off of this amount. And over the next 9 years, our organization grew from me selling real estate to a team, to a brokerage, to some other companies. But for 9 years, that was how much money me and then my wife lived off of, and our family lived off of it as we grew. So we didn't take a dividend from the company for 9 years. And the result was the company grew at a 75% compounded annual growth rate over basically 10 years, which is unheard of without outside capital.
Yeah.
But basically what enabled that to happen was this simple idea, right, that if you fix your expenses, wherever that is, if you can fix your expenses at a number that's less than your income, right, then you have a delta, right? And people talk a lot about investing as being this really, it's all about what kind of return did you get, but the first step in investing is to create the delta. If there's no delta between your expenses and your income, then there is no investing. It doesn't matter how much money you make. There is nothing to invest unless you create that delta. So the quicker you can create that delta, no matter how small. Sometimes we say, I don't want to do it. I don't want to create the delta because it's too small. If I only had $100, that's not enough to invest, right? So sometimes I think one of the benefits we have in this room is folks are fairly young. We've got time. He was talking about time. This is the slow plotting. Well, time's on our side. So if we can create even the smallest delta and start setting that aside and letting that compound, we get to reap the benefits of that slow and steady element of real estate that goes forward. So for us, that's what that experience was like. It meant oftentimes killing it in real estate and not living like we were killing it in real estate. Seeing folks around us who were doing a fifth of the production, drive a nicer car or live in a nicer house or do whatever. But at the end of the day, you look back on it, there's a foundation there that you've now built that allows you to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, and there's a couple things I hear in Bo's response there. One is just real estate is a really simple business. It's all about personal finance. And if you can't control your personal finances, I mean your household budget, there is no way you're going to be able to be a good steward of an apartment building or an office building and create that delta he's talking about. Because life is all about having a certain amount of income and making sure that your expenses don't exceed that. And so we talked about Dave Ramsey and he being one of the really important, influential people in my life and my journey. Living on less than you make is really, really simple, but it's very difficult to do. And I think people that figure that out and learn how to create that gap, that's where all the wealth comes from. And then real estate is just one of those incredible situations where it's slow and methodical, and the sooner you can do it intentionally with some purpose, the better you're going to be, because real estate over time generally appreciates. You'll find little gaps in markets where it'll seem like things have gone down, but generally as an asset class, real estate is where a lot of the wealthiest individuals participate and create and grow their wealth. So going to realtor advice, Bo shared on this conference call also about how he stepped out of the day-to-day brokerage. And I remember a story at Christmas in Boston where you're describing to your wife how you really want to get out of the day-to-day buying and selling, and she's like, well, wait, that's where we make all of our income. So how's this going to work? And so how did you involve both your spouse in the business as well as just kind of how did that conversation go about how you decided to intentionally grow your real estate investment business?
Well, I think much of my success has just been all about having much smarter people around me, and my wife is probably the best example of that. It was about 3 years into the business, and sort of built a successful real estate team, had just launched the brokerage, and had just completed just bringing to market our first condo project that we developed. That was the largest project we'd ever done, and it was Christmas. So it was a slow real estate thing. It was Christmas of 2007. We just delivered the first condo project. So we were a little nervous. So I go home to Boston, and my mom, who was an elementary school teacher, has a big blackboard in the kitchen. This is where we learned all our sort of childhood lessons. And so I'm up there trying to chart with the chalk, this is the structure of our company, and here's what I'm doing, and Mom, aren't you proud of me? You said I'd never amount to anything being a realtor, but we're gonna go somewhere.
I sense there was a guns cap in that kitchen also.
And so I'm charting out, we're going to grow this brokerage, we're going to build this development company, or do this property management, and my wife's very quiet. She's just sitting there quietly, and she's like, do you mind just explaining, how much revenue came from each of those businesses? And what was the net margin in each of those businesses? How much money did you actually take home? She's like, oh, really? Yeah, you made all your money in the sales business, and here you are trying to, say you're going to get out of the sales business and go do all this stuff. And so that was a turning point. My wife said, well, if you're going to do that, I'm going to get my real estate license. And she took a woman who was then my executive assistant, and they took over and ran the sales team and built the second iteration of our company. And the big lesson from that for me was, one, I was, it's what was earlier when I was thinking about what Sasha was saying about service through systems. I thought that I had some healthy confidence. I thought I'd done well. I thought it was an important part of the sales team. And I learned quickly that for my marriage, I was not going to be able to participate. Like, my wife is somebody who was not going to take any sort of interference or direction from me. And so I was removed quickly from the sales team. And I learned that a lot of what people wanted was the service experience. They didn't want me. I was completely irrelevant to their experience of our team. It was the quality of service they got. And so how do you actually build that team and that system that can deliver that service? I think sometimes we personalize that, and I think that that's all about us. The other thing I learned is that I think we're going through the third iteration. I think of that as the second iteration of our business. And the first iteration was very entrepreneurial. I went out, it had more going on than I could possibly figure out how to do. So I literally collected people, right? And they were my friends. They were people I knew needed a job. And so I was out there, like, engaging all these people and saying, hey, like, let's go over here, let's go over here, let's go over here, let's go over here. And I think my biggest, I was on this Inc. panel, they asked me, what's your biggest failure? And I think my biggest failure was the first real estate sales team I built. And it's because I built a group of people that were all there because they needed something. They needed a job, they wanted to learn from me, they were my friend. There was a reason they were there, but none of it had to do with where we were going. None of it had to do with the mission of the company, none of it had to do with what we wanted to achieve. And so what happened was I had all these people, and I was trying to go over there, and I was trying to drag them with me to go over there. And the biggest lesson I think I got from this recoring of the team was that going forward, I needed to find people who wanted to go where I wanted to go, and then I needed to get behind them and support them in going on that journey, rather than find people who weren't sure where they wanted to go, and try and drag them in the direction I was going. And for me, that changed really my world in business and where it was going.
My next question digs into not only the stress that realtors will experience when you start investing in real estate, but anyone that may have a primary income coming from somewhere else but real estate. How do you find a way to not allow your real estate investments to become a distraction to your business? I think it's one of the most important things to think about, because I work with a lot of realtors that invest in rental property. What ends up happening is at some point that becomes a full-time job in and of itself.
I think if you think about it, if you stick to that initial simple principle, that you have a business, that business is designed to earn a certain income. And if your expenses are less than that income, then you can invest the delta. If you don't get I think a lot of people get drunk with the excitement of investing. Maybe they have some success and they go, wow, that was easy money. If I could do that again, maybe I don't have to. And so they take their foot off their primary foundational business driver. And so if we're real estate agents, the business of buying and selling homes is our primary business driver. And so investment needs to be secondary to that. We need to make sure that we continue doing the core things that drive that, and let this be where we put our extra. And if we lose sight of the fact this is where we put our extra, we need to pay attention to it. We need to be educated about it. We need to spend time on it. But we need to know what our primary focus is. What's our one thing? Well, our one thing is actually being great real estate agents so that we have the income to do this and move it over here. Maybe at some point that investment portfolio gets big enough that becomes what your primary focus is. But I think sometimes that's one issue that comes up. And then the other is failure to actually build the right team or the right relationships and partnerships. I think to do investing successfully, you need great legal. Marty, who was here earlier, has been a tremendous legal resource to us.
Great management.
Yeah, having people can manage the property managers, having great financing if you're going to take on debt, and having sort of different structures that you need to do that. And so you need to make sure that those relationships are in place so that the experts are handling what they're expert at, and you're handling what you're expert at, and what you're delivering to that as an investor. So you're primarily not an active participant in that. You're providing the capital that allows that to happen.
I've seen this happen a number of different times, both in my life, but it's been a real short period. My wife and I just sold our first rental property that we owned for about 4 years, but I've seen a number of other realtors that get to the point where they start to actually compete with their clients. And commercial realtors have this big issue, and your clients want you to be there to serve them, and that's what we're here in the service business for, to make sure that their objectives are met. And so you've got to be really careful about making sure that your personal investments don't interfere and get in the way of that. And that's a weird situation. It's a weird dichotomy that you go through, because you kind of say, well, I want to take care of my house first, but the reality is if your primary income is coming from the real estate brokerage business or your pizza business or wherever else, you've got to focus on that with intentionality. In July, in our podcast, you talked about failure, and you just mentioned that Inc. Interview that you did. The thing I love that you said about failure was that it's not so much about how hard you can hit or how hard you just got hit, but how quickly you can get up. Maybe talk a little bit about failure and how you've dealt with adversity throughout both real estate brokerage and also real estate investing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's my favorite. It's Rocky. That's not Menkiti, but that the statement of it's not about how hard you can hit, it's about how hard you can get hit and still get back up. It's about how hard you can get hit and still keep going. That ultimately, I think we think about success as being about success. And there's a great little blog post the other day, and I forget who it's by, but Seth Godin put it up on his blog, and he said that basically our future is not designed by the pleasure we wish to experience, but by the pain we're willing to experience. So you start to think about, what do I want, right? What do I want to do? He used the example of wanting to be a great rock guitarist, but not wanting to practice, right? Not wanting to actually spend the time in the room with the instrument day after day, day after day. And so ultimately, as we choose the thing we want to do, right? We choose our win. We also choose our pain, because we choose our path. And there's something about each path that has pain. That's just the way life is. Life is not all sunshine and roses, right? It's gonna, and I think for those, as we stay around long enough, we realize that life's gonna kick everyone in the teeth at some point. No one just breezes through this thing. And so the question is about how do you respond to that? And the bigger you set your goals, right? The further you put yourself out there, the more leadership you take on, the larger things you try to do, the more failure becomes a part of your life. And so the question becomes, how do you deal with it, right? So what is failure? We have this little saying that says, fail fast, get back up quick, right? This idea that we want the quicker we can process failure and eliminate it from our future activities, the quicker we learn. And it's something that is actually really important for working in a team or working with others, that I've also been learning this now. I'm sort of trying to figure out now, is how do we let other people experience failure in a constructive way, so that people can learn? Because oftentimes as team leaders or as managers or as parents, I got 3 little boys and I don't want them to fail, but sometimes they need to have that failure so that they can actually internalize the emotion of that experience, which is what shapes their learning. And in our organization, we're oftentimes wondering about, well, why didn't somebody respond like that? Well, sometimes they didn't respond like that because they never had the experience of the pain that's related with the failure of that. And so it's a weird way of looking at the world, but it's also saying hey, if we look at what we actually want to do, we actually get to choose our pain. It's pretty cool. You get to choose your pain. If you want to be a great real estate agent, you better do lead generation. You get to choose that's what you're going to put your time on and be successful at it. So it's been, for me, tremendous amounts of failure. Trying to start a team, totally messing it up, doing it again, trying it, opening a real estate office that was marginally okay, figuring out how to do it again, right? Buying my first investment property, complete disaster. I hired the guy who was the waiter at the local restaurant, who told me he ran a construction business on the side. Probably not the best way to find an expert professional to run your job. But basically, those series of failures help inform you about how to go forward.
Malcolm Gladwell famously wrote about 10,000 hours, right? That's what it takes to become an expert in any field. And the quicker you can get to that point, the faster you become an expert. And I think the interesting thing is, you talk about pain, we, as professionals, somehow feel like we should be immune to pain, immune to issues, immune to challenges, and we just should just have everything figured out. I don't know if that happens in high school or in college, where you feel like if you don't have the right answer, you're wrong, and therefore you're not intelligent. Well, the best example I've ever heard of talking about failure is treat it like a scientist. Experiment. Think about how many different tries, and I don't remember how many it was for Edison to figure out which particular filament made the light bulb work. There's a metal called tungsten. And the issue there is that it wasn't about all the failures, it was all about that one success. And that's all that mattered. Now we have the benefit of electricity and light. So just think about it when you're approaching failure, just say, hey, I'm gonna get back up and keep on trucking, baby. So our social responsibility as realtors, both in the public as well as investors, it surrounds the topic of legacy. A lot of the developers I've worked with are very cognizant about their social responsibility. How do you feel about that topic?
Well, I think I'm pretty passionate about this topic because I think that we sort of, as the next generation of leadership in the real estate industry, have a tremendous opportunity, but also a tremendous obligation to ensure that as this industry evolves, both we as an industry and the people who we serve understand the power and the honor that's involved in the role and the profession that you take on every day. If you look at it from a real estate agent, you get invited into a very special space to touch on people's lives. And there's just a general obligation that comes with that level of access, that level of representation, where you take on the interest of the client rather than your interests. And so when you enter into a client fiduciary relationship, you enter into a relationship where the client's interest comes first. So I think you have to remember that. You should never forget that. In the services business, that's how it works. Secondly, I think if you think long-term about real estate, if you think about real estate investing as a get-rich-quick scheme, there's a lot of pressure to use the extra information you have in a negative way that could potentially negatively impact somebody else. So if you're going around looking like, how can I get a house and flip it in a month and make a ton of money, well then there's a direct uncorrelation between how that seller is realizing the value of their asset. If you look at real estate as a long-term part of a wealth building portfolio that's going to create cash flow over time, and it's going to appreciate and change with time based on the investments you're going to make in it, all of a sudden that conflict isn't there, and you start to look at it differently. So I think if you can look at investment and relationships from the long view, you start to remove a lot of the conflicts that come up as people start to work through that space.
And one of the things I think that gets missed in real estate discussions about the social aspects of our business, as you invest in real estate, the same fiduciary responsibility that you may have being a real estate professional working with a buyer or a seller, you also have a responsibility as a landlord working with your tenant. There's a lot of laws around that subject. There's a lot of, one of the biggest areas of focus by our real estate commission in Colorado is landlord-tenant disputes and bad management. And I think that that's a parallel to the real estate brokerage industry is the rental business, and making sure that you handle folks with dignity. Use the golden rule. Treat others as you treat yourself, and I think that that's very important. So we talked about the macro legacy and your purpose. How about on a micro level for your family? What legacy do you hope to pass on to your kids?
Gosh. So I guess I'd hope to pass on to my children a spirit of adventure, a spirit of figuring out what your passion is. I'm big on people figuring out what they're passionate about, figuring out what gifts they have, and how they can use those gifts to have an impact on the world. And I think that's why we're here. In this time we spend here, in my opinion, we're here because we've got some innate, God-given gifts inside of us. We're not here just to take up a space. Everyone's got serious gifts. And figuring out what those are. The quicker we can figure out what those are. So my legacy would be that to create an organization and to create an environment and a network of relationships that enable people to identify their gifts and to manifest those gifts in a way that has a broader impact on the people around them.
Yeah, I can't remember the author, the poet, whoever it was that said one of the saddest things in the world is someone who doesn't find what they're uniquely gifted at. And I think that as a father is a huge legacy component to what you naturally do, and say, your kids are bent a certain way, And while you'd love for them to be, a pro basketball player or something, they may not be gifted in that arena, and really helping them get exposed to the areas that they should be following, I think is really a gift. My final question is back to real estate agents and real estate professionals. What's the one thing that you think that each realtor should know about themselves?
So I think the business has many ways to succeed, right? And I think you've seen different people take different approaches. We heard from our panel, like some people I hate being around people, some people I love being around people. James doesn't know how to hold a baby, but he's still selling families' homes. So figuring out what is the skill, what is the gift you have, and how does that gift relate to the business of real estate? Because I think we're oftentimes masterminding, learning from one another, and sometimes that can cause us to be like squirrel, new idea, new idea, new idea, new idea. And the reality is that if we can listen to those ideas, figure out some essence of core truth in them, figure out how they apply to taking our core capability. Your practice, whatever your business is, has a unique component to you that uses the talents and skills that have been built up from what you have that make that successful. And you've had that success already. Back to your conversation earlier about how do you take your strength and make it so strong that you annihilate the competition, right? I think it's, as realtors, sometimes we can focus on, well, I don't do that, and I don't do that, and I don't do that. There's many ways to generate leads, and there's many ways to create leverage. And at the end of the day, those are the two things you have to do to be successful as a real estate agent. To be able to generate leads and be able to create some sort of leverage in your business that allows it to grow. And there's multiple ways to do that. And so I think identifying the one that fits with your strengths, that fits with your capabilities, and then having a model and system about to do that is the one thing that makes real estate agents successful.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said. I mean, figuring that one area that you can be your own person. Anyone who's watched the podcast knows that I believe that leaders are readers. I believe that people that intentionally educate themselves outside of formal high school or college really are the leaders of America. And it's a sad statistic, but I did a blog post a couple weeks ago and found a stat from 2014, so it's not that old, saying that after college graduation, over 40% of individuals won't read a book cover to cover that graduated from college. So these are educated folks. And so, again, I believe that leaders are readers, and so I got you a gift. You're a father, and we were talking about this last night at the game, but one of my favorite Dave Ramsey books is called Smart Money, Smart Kids. And it's all about how you teach your kids 4 main things that they have to learn before they leave the house. One is to work. One is to save. One is to spend, because you need to know how to spend wisely. And the last is to give. Because we were all made to be givers. And so the principles in this book I love. I've read it cover to cover, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. So thank you for your time, everybody. This has been a special edition of Kyle Malnati Show from Washington, D.C. As I love to say, for my guest, Bo Menkiti, we will see you around the neighborhood.